Good morning, everyone. Do we have the microphone on? I think it works. Good to be here. Very glad to be back in Oslo. Thanks to the president and the team at the BI, and most of all, thanks for all of you for coming to this lecture. This topic is huge, and you might ask yourself, what's about these darlings and dragons here? And that's what we're going to explore this morning with a couple of views, because I spent the last 17 years in Asia. I went to a business school called INSEAD in 1999 in France. And in 2000, I settled in Asia, what was supposed to be 3 years, but it ended up being 17 years of my life. In essence, I've actually just moved back to Copenhagen back in June. I'm still going to work globally. But when I moved to Asia, everyone said, what's a big deal about Asia? Why do you move there? I don't know why I moved, but I think back in 2000, nobody looked at Asia, nobody looked at Korea, nobody looked at China and all of that. And you look at that region today, that is a region that is really making impact. And that's what we're going to explore this morning. It all started with the current developments back in 1978. You might be familiar with these two gentlemen, Deng Xiaoping, at that time the Prime Minister of China, and also Lee Kuan Yew, the Prime Minister of Singapore. Deng Xiaoping went to Singapore during the summer in 78. It was his first travel outside China. And he came to Singapore and he saw the rise of that little city-state. And he went back and he said, there's something about Singapore. I want to have that as well. I want to open up China. So that was supposedly, now nobody really knows deep inside how to read China, but that supposedly were when China really decided to open up. That was back in 1978. And a lot of things have happened since then. First of all, I'll give you 6 different perspectives. First of all, you have seen, or you are seeing, maybe more now than we have seen until now, a huge rise in new markets, demographic shifts, and most importantly, a lot of young consumers coming into the market class. Think at what's happening east of Pakistan. 2/3 of the world population lives east of Pakistan. Younger populations coming up, rising middle class, more consumer confidence. Whereas back in 2000 when I arrived, it was all about what came from the Western world and they wanted to import Western brands and all that. But now Asian consumers are realizing, wait a minute, we have great stuff ourselves. So there's a rising confidence somehow, and they will become a future leader, there's no doubt about it, after 17 years of having seen that. I have no hesitation to say, and I think maybe with recent developments, did you see that 3.5-hour speak by President Xi? You know, there was a very important meeting in China recently, right? Just finished. Very long speech by the current premier. For sure, China's going to rise, and you're going to see a lot of interesting and challenging developments as we go forward. Secondly, Asian century. And the Asian century is going to be defined of a period where we're not going to have more of everything. We're actually going to have less. We're going to into a period of, I would call, scarcity somehow. There's not going to be more of everything. It's going to be more about how do we reallocate. And with a lot of people coming into the consumer class, how's that allocation going to take place? So that's going to be one dimension. The second dimension is also going to be about knowledge, about education, about how do we bring new technology or new things to the market here? So are we really going to see a model that was based, I would say, on Western style, global style, capitalism? Or are we going to see a model, maybe with what you have seen happening in China right now, a model that is much more relying on the way that Asia would do it? Capitalism is capitalism, I know that. But somehow, how much would Asia make a stand in the global marketplace? And what would be some of those challenges as we see that going forward? Thirdly, I think it's going to be quite interesting to see that the economic globalization of Asia will start to redefine a lot of different things as we move forward. You're going to see the rise of Asian multinationals and brands. When I came to Asia in 2000, I don't think there weren't really any Asian brands when it came to it. There was no Samsung, there was no Huawei, there was no Alibaba, there was really no one. There were a few brands from Japan. Japan had been rising much earlier. Korea have started to get out there, but the rest of Asia haven't really shown anything. And Asia is going to focus on innovation to do that. Just two examples which are somehow very low-tech. One of them being JD.com. Have you heard about JD.com? Of course you have heard it, some said. JD.com is quite interesting. It's probably one of the biggest distribution firms in the world. And here you see a guy in downtown Shanghai, where he's actually reloading his little truck, and where Jeff Bezos is now thinking about bringing drones and how to get motorbikes and get all the Amazon stuff up. They do the same thing in China, and the way they do it is with a lot of these small JD.com trucks, or the small motorbikes that you see here. I can't remember the number of motorbikes, but there are a lot of them, and it's a very, very interesting, and it's a very fast-moving system as they go forward. One example of, call it small innovation, but it's actually at scale, and it's changing, and it was making sure that e-commerce could actually take place, and it could happen in China. Second one, biggest challenge, one of the big challenges for the consumer brands and the fashion brands is how do we recycle? How do we get consumers to put back the used merchandise that we have here from fashion? And look at a company like, you're familiar with Uniqlo from Japan. They are setting up, everyone else have done that as well, but the way they did it at scale very early on, put your merchandise in here and we'll cycle it for you. Just small pieces of innovation, let alone technology and all the very sophisticated pieces. Every time we think about technology, Asia is also capable, willing to do things at scale, which sometimes come from a very small place. Will the West continue to be a trendsetter? Everything came from the Western world, right? All the dreams came from Hollywood. All the quality cars came from Germany. The beauty came from Paris. Fashion and trends came out of Milan. What about the future? I believe that's definitely going to come from Asia. Trends will continue to emerge from Asia. Japan have always given us great stuff. We kind of forget that the last 40 years, Japan have churned out a lot of trends and things and colors and moved into fashion and all sorts of things. Very trendy place, still is. But now Korea is moving, now other places are moving. And they're going to export what I call the Asian identity and the Asian way of life. You might have heard, have you heard about the Hallyu, the Korean wave? The wave haven't really hit the Western world, I have to admit. But you go to Asia and you look at all the countries outside Korea around them, China, Taiwan, Philippines, Singapore, Indonesia, India, they love Korea. And what's the big fuss about it? Supposedly to Asian women, Asian men for that matter, Korean women were very beautiful. There's a huge beauty industry, deemed to be very beautiful when it comes from Korea. They are exporting the cultural economy. They are exporting cultural artifacts to an extent that you have not seen before. So they are exporting movies, games, music, all sorts of things that come from Korea. Now, did that happen by choice? No, it didn't really. It actually is a crafted exercise. There's a ministry in Korea, which is very well funded, because the budget runs over $1 billion US. $1 billion US for what? To export Korean popular culture. Making sure we get the new pop bands, making sure we get some monster hits of movies, new cosmetics firms, people that can dance, you name it, whatever popular culture is, to export that to the rest of the world. $1 billion to make that happen. Still rising. But now, when we're going to export the Asian identity, we're going to think about why would the Western world pick it up in the first place? Here's Asia's challenge in a nutshell. You're probably very familiar with the brand on the right-hand side, right? Just do it. Do you know the brand on the left-hand side? Yeah. What's the name called? Li-Ning. From China, right? Famous company? You have to say yes. The political correct answer is yes. Very famous company. Mr. Li-Ning was an Olympic sportsman. He went to the Olympics in Los Angeles 1984. He won, I think, 7 or 9 medals, became a national hero back in China, rightly so, of course. And he set up the Li-Ning Sports Apparel Company. Grew to become a national hero, national sports apparel company in China. and wanted to take on the Western world. So he invited everyone in China to come up with a new logo, and that's a logo that they crafted. And they also invited someone to come up with a slogan. Now, is this going to take on in the Western world? Maybe. It depends. But one of the key challenges for Asian firms, as I wrote here, is first of all, they need to be authentic, and they need to think about being different. I'm going to come back to that theme slightly in my end of it. First of all, authenticity. Here's a company which I find is very authentic and somehow represents the archetypical soul of Asia. It's a company called Jim Thompson. I know it has a Western name for a very good reason, because Mr. Thompson that you see on the right-hand side was an American soldier, and he fought in World War II in Asia. And after the war, he settled in Thailand. He fell in love with the weavers. He fell in love with the weaving industry, or he fell in love with Thailand. And then he fell in love with the weavers of Thailand. They had thousands of weavers in the cottage industry weaving silk, Thai silk. And Jim Thompson said, wait a minute, why don't we stand up here and make more of an export product? So he got all the weavers together in 1949, and he created the Jim Thompson Apparel Company. And you go back to the 50s, into the 60s, Jim Thompson were one of the most famous trend companies in the world, because a very young Crown Princess Elizabeth from the UK, later the Queen of England, wore all her dresses. Most of her dresses came from Jim Thompson silk. All the celebrities, all the high lifers came to Bangkok to dine with Mr. Thompson and all of that. So he had a pretty thriving business. Now, 1967, he went on a holiday in Malaysia, Cameron Highlands north of Kuala Lumpur. He went out for a cigarette in the mountains. 20 minutes later, he was gone. His body was never recovered. And there are still speculations in Thailand, across Asia, what happened to Mr. Thompson. His body wasn't recovered. Eaten by a tiger. Malaysia were full of tigers in the 60s into the 70s. Were he abducted by the Russians because he supposedly fought for the kind of the former agency to the CIA, OCSE? Or was he just killed by the Americans? All these speculations are still out there. There are books coming out every 5 years about the myth of Jim Thompson. Nevertheless, that helped to build the company, because there is this myth about Mr. Thompson. And today, Jim Thompson is not a big company by far. It's not a big company. It's a mid-sized Thai company, but it still has a lot of influence. Why? Because it's bringing something which is very authentic, truly Asian, and definitely not Western to the world. So that's kind of one stake in the ground. The second thing about differentiation, you may not heard about a company called Amore Pacific. Have you heard about Amore Pacific? It's actually a former medical company. It was founded back in the 30s, third generation. Current owner, Mr. Saw, kind of grew it into a modern skincare and cosmetics company. He used to be a very small company in Korea. When I started to provide a few speaks and I did things with them, he was a small company, but he wanted to take on the world. He wanted to showcase that, first of all, we are different to the Japanese Shiseido, but we are definitely much more different to L'Oreal and the Estée Lauders and all the Western cosmetics brands. And how do we do that? First of all, by being authentic, but also making sure that we are different. And the difference lies in the Korean beauty. It lies in a lot of the ingredients, from green tea, from things you find in the soil of Jeju Island, which is a southern island of South Korea, and so forth. You go on and on. A lot of big and small pieces of innovation that somehow all in all creates a very different offering. Now you look at Amore Pacific. Mr. Saw actually for the first time ever went public on TV. He was on CNBC a few weeks back. He has never granted an interview to international media. Amore Pacific is now the second largest Korean company. And he's the second richest guy in Korea after the Lee family that owns Samsung. And he used to be probably number 20 or 25 10 years ago. It is really catching on. Think about the Singapore Airlines exporting Asian hospitality or service to an extent that I think we cannot do in the Western world. I just flew back from Asia 3 days ago on Singapore Airlines. Always a very pleasant experience. Then you have to jump on a local aircraft. I'm not going to name who that was. There are two airlines that take you from Copenhagen to Oslo. It's a very different experience. To be political correct here, we'll just leave out the names. What did they decide to do? They decided to export Asian hospitality. Founded in 1967 because, as you might know, Singapore got kicked out of the Malaysian Federation in October '65. They ran a dual airline, but kind of couldn't keep it up. So they decided to split up. And in 1973, Singapore launched their own airline, based on the promise of great service, but making sure they're going to deliver on all of that in terms of innovation, first one to brew a coffee, first one to fly the 380, in a lot of aspects, operations, being the first one to do something. Small thing from a hot towel, huge leapfrogging change in terms of being the first one to fly the 380. But that's also showcasing to the world something which I think is very archetypical for Asia, great service. Third one, or the fifth one, is also that we're going to see the shift in terms of global cities as we move forward. Urbanization is going to be a major driver of economic growth. And some of the biggest cities, most of them are going to emerge out of Asia. They already have kind of arrived. And you see more cities coming. You're going to India, you're going to China, which started to, I mean, we used to talk about tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, but you see a lot of them. And in the next forthcoming years, you see some of the biggest ones are going to come from Asia. It's going to be a very, very powerful driver because it's going to lead to economic growth. Why? Because people from the farmland, people from out there are going to kind of merge and congregate around the big cities. And that in itself, yes, it's going to put a lot of challenges on governments, but it's also going to foster economic driving growth as we move forward. Just one example here, mobile car wash. This is an old picture from Beijing in front of the American embassy. So if you have your car somewhere, all over Beijing and Chinese cities, you just call a guy, he pops up and he'll wash your car. Back to innovation, but also back to that's actually creating a job from someone. May not be a skilled worker and so forth, but that's actually accommodating growth in big cities. Just a very small example from kind of the big scale happening as we go forward. But if you want to succeed in the global bazaar, you need to have a global mindset. One thing is to say, wait a minute, I want to participate in global competition here. I want to move out of Asia and want to do it. What is the prime? Why should you do that deep inside? First of all, you need to have a mindset set by Narayana Murthy, one of the co-founders of Infosys, one of the best performing IT companies in kind of modern times out of India. It is because you're going to move up in the financial value chain. Primary driver why you see the Asian corporations move outside. Try to think at the left-hand side. There you see the production of a sports shoe. To produce a sports shoe in the very low bottom, production cost is around $5 to $10, $12 US. Done in China, not so much anymore, moved into India, done now in Indonesia and moving to other places. $5 to $10. What's the margin that you get? Probably a few dollars. And whenever you move upstream and you move to the right, the more you see that premium from the sports shoe. It might eventually end up somewhere in Long Beach in California. Someone puts a stamp on it called the swoosh, the Nike stamp, and suddenly it trades at what? $150, $200 for a pair of sports shoes. The Western guy get most of that premium. That is one of the key forces why the Asian firms have said, wait a minute, first of all, it's hard to keep up to being a low-cost manufacturer. Look at the eastern coastal regions of China. They're not cheap anymore. They're almost at par with the Western price. So low cost is going to move somewhere else. So what are you going to do if you're living in the east coastal regions of China? You're going to find something else to do. This is one of the key reasons. I'm going to move up. I'm going to build brands. I'm going to create much more value creation in my company and in my economies. So what are we going to do about it in the Western world? Because if the Asian firms are coming and the Asian economies are rising, I've seen that personally for years and I keep still following it. It's kind of time to repair the roof when the sun is shining. We're still doing very well, but if we're going to see a tsunami of influence from Asia, question mark. Because will Asia rise? Will Asia be able to kick it off fully? That's why I kind of created a little grid here. I call it the Asian Power and Alliance grid. And this could obviously take up an entire other lecture here. I just want to give you kind of alert yourself to a few axes here happening. You definitely have one axis which I call China. Very powerful, very big, at scale, a lot of forces because think what China has done over the last maybe 20 years, maybe since Deng Xiaoping, have pulled out a lot of people from poverty. No doubt about it. Hundreds of millions of people have been pulled out of poverty, and they still keep rising. Back to Xi speak a couple of days back. So China is rising in some kind of a close alliance with Hong Kong, which is pulled on China. That's one force. They're going to rise. They're going to come out there. They're going to create companies and competition, at least into Asia, but definitely into the global world. Then you have another axis, due to history, due to war, due to sentiment, which I call India, Japan, and Taiwan. Where Japan have always have kind of a contrarian stand in terms of China because of war, because of history, and because of a lot of nuances in history we have to understand. So they are at a very, very different axis of China rising, not in an alliance with India, but India somehow also has its own call with China somehow. Not that China and India are aligned, because they're very, very, very different in that sense. And the third axis, I call it Korea and ASEAN. Why is that? Because ASEAN, the ASEAN countries, mostly Southeast Asia, is around 1 billion people. It's much more contrasted. It's more cultures. It's not so coherent. You can't look at ASEAN and just saying this is 1 billion people combined. Yes, it is, but it's not one economy. It's not a European Union somehow, but they're talking about doing the same like the EU. They are a little aligned with Korea because Korea is kind of screwed between Japan, that tends to lean very much towards the Western world, but they're also making sure, because China is the biggest export market for Korea, also going to make sure they're on good footing with China. So you see some very funny axes. You can almost see like 3 lines floating around here, and they're all in flux all the time because different alliances are coming up. We have a different type of president in the White House currently, and that is creating some challenges for some of these axes as well, because they might rethink about who are the best friends in class. The president of Singapore is currently in Washington. He met Trump 2 days ago. And for sure, Singapore has always had a very Western orientation, but at the same time also respected the big sister in the north. And now I'm pretty sure nobody knows about it, but they are rethinking. What is my new partner? What is my new partner in crime? Who is the darling? Who is the dragon in this power grid? So as we are talking about Asia rising, we also have to understand the political axes and what I call the power grid. I'm just going to leave it here because it's there's still room for interpretation, but it's going to define where Asia is also going to move as we move forward. So, in order to act on all that, here's a chart from a different session. Board of directors should think a little more forward-looking, because in current companies and in current boards of the global firms, most of the board of directors are spending a lot of time thinking about the past. There is a thing called risk. There's another topic called governance. So 60 to 70% of all board time in global companies on average is spent backward. Back mirror, what happened yesterday? What about the results and the P&L? Things and action that actually lies back before the current date. But they're going to look forward, because they're going to deal with the rise of Asia, the rise of China, the Asian brands coming into the economic class, and what would that mean for things happening forward? Because what's going to happen here? 2 things are going to happen somehow, because you're going to see the forces here from left to right of Asian firms wanting to move out of Asia. And that starts by being maybe like Mr. Saw, a great cosmetics company at home, loved by the Koreans, admired by people outside, but I want to take it much more into becoming an international company. I want it to become a global company. And that travel, that journey is complex. It doesn't happen overnight for a lot of reasons. You move into regional where you see certain challenges, maybe language. You go international, suddenly the complexity comes up. You're going to look at organization, you're going to look at your processes. You have different time zones. You're going to look at how do we replicate. I can't sit as a CEO, as a company owner, as a family owner and control and decide on everything. I need to make sure my organization delivers. And finally, one fine day, I'll become a global company. And when I do become a global company, that's because I have created a purpose that a lot of people can rely on. It's because I have somehow globalized, but I've also localized. So am I just going to bring all that Korean cosmetics out? For example, if you look at all the Asian cosmetics brands, there's something called whitening cream. Are you aware of whitening creams? You heard about it, right? So some girls, women in the world would actually use a whitening cream. It will not really be sold in the Western world because we want to be tanned. Sometimes in Asia, you want to have a little more of a kind of a white, neutral skin color. So you're going to localize. You're not going to bring all your whitening cream to the Western world. You have to be a little careful here what you bring out there. Culture is important, and then if you put it all together, that might end up being a global, very powerful corporation like the ones we saw out of Japan, like the rise of Samsung, like a lot of the Fortune 500 that grew predominantly out of America and took like 40, 50 years to do that. That might finally happen one day. But there are two reasons why Asia has to watch a little closer here, because there are kind of two drivers of leadership from Asia, two distincts here. First of all is, if you want to make that happen, if the Asian firms really want to make a mark on the global level, they first of all going to look at country of origin, which is very, very important. I alluded before to all the brands coming out of Hollywood, all the dreams, all the technology brands out of California. Think about a car from Germany, right? Mercedes, BMW. Once you graduate one fine day, you're going to have your BMW and a Mercedes, and who knows, Italian car or bike, I don't know. Would any one of you buy a Chinese car? Hands up. You seem to be a little reluctant, right? Would you buy a Chinese mobile phone? Okay, we see a slow take up here, right? And why would you buy a phone and not a car? Because the phone is not a big risk. It comes at what, 1,000, 2,000 Norwegian kroner, maybe it's bundled in with one of the telcos, so you don't really bother. Whereas a car is much more expensive. First of all, you can't really get rid of it right after. Two, what may your neighbor think about you? Yes. Most importantly. And for a car, that's very important. You wouldn't know the brand of my suit. Is it just kind of a local tailor in Singapore? Or is it kind of one of the Italian brands? You wouldn't know, and it doesn't matter because I know it. But some brands, like a car, is very important in terms of building your identity. So where you come from, it's very, very, very important. Japanese products didn't fare well in America in the 50s. Korean products didn't fare well until 10 or 15 years ago. Samsung started to catch on. And you see the same is going to happen surely for the other brands in the other countries in Asia. Think about China for a start. Yes, we may buy a Chinese mobile phone today, but what about tomorrow or the day after tomorrow? We might want to buy a Chinese car. That's good for exports. It's good for kind of the general perception of the country. And there could also sometimes be some internal rallying in terms of policies. We have seen it in Singapore. You see it currently in Korea. You're definitely going to see it in China, let alone the president's current speak in China. Is also going to send very strong messages internally. So it's very important to brand those countries. Think about example like Huawei. Have you heard about Huawei? Yes. And that's quite remarkable because when I asked the same question in class 5 years ago, I would say only native Asians have heard about Huawei and Chinese have heard about Huawei. It's a very young company, right? Supposedly a couple of engineers broke out of Cisco many years ago. They formed Huawei, supposedly with a bit of support from the Chinese government, and everyone laughed about it. It was very controversial because supposedly Huawei have borrowed a couple of patents, a couple of formulas, a couple of products, maybe. So there was a settlement outside court, that was reported in global media, and time went on. And today Huawei is spending around 14% on innovation of turnover, pulling out great technology, great innovation. They are a big patent filer. You know who is the biggest patent filer in the world, patent holder? Samsung. IBM Corporation. Samsung is up there. Huawei is becoming one of the biggest ones. They are pulling off a lot of great stuff. They've come a long way in just maybe 10 to 15 years. So that is also helping to redefine the made in tag. Who really rebranded Korea? Would you buy a mobile phone from Korea? Yes. Answer is yes. Would you buy a car from Korea? No. Answer is yes. It's a good car. You would almost buy, would you buy cosmetics from Korea? Yes. Yeah, good cosmetics. You see, where did that come from? Did it come from the government that said, now we're just going to clean up the act, now we're going to provide great technology, we don't want to have all the copycats and all that? It came from a public-private partnership. The same is happening right now for Huawei. This is one of the biggest positive assets for the Chinese government. Why? Because you have a company that's going to stand up there, that's going to innovate, that's going to bring the face and the flag, not because of national pride, but they're going to bring something to the world that we haven't seen before, and that's going to pull with them the perception of China. An example very close to home. Think what IKEA have done for Sweden. Right? All those meatballs and all those furniture and all those cheap value price products and all that. Imagine what they have done for Sweden. Most customers have never been there. Nevertheless, they have this perception about Sweden. Democratic society, cheap products, good value, and all of that. Two, aside from rebranding where you come from, you're also going to need to have the ability to build what I call global brand equity. I'm just giving you kind of a summary of, I would say, the current technology battle. You also have battles in cosmetics, you have it in retail, you have it in e-commerce, you have it in cars, transport, you have it in military equipment, a lot of stuff. But try to think about two sets of technology firms here. On the left-hand side, all of you would know them. But think about the ones on the right-hand side. I'm pretty familiar by now. You will be familiar with who they are. You heard about this guy? Who's that? What do they do? It's a search engine, right? It's kind of the equivalent to Google just coming out of China. Tencent behind these guys, WeChat and other people, rising. And if you asked the same question 5 years ago in class and elsewhere, nobody would have heard about them. But they're coming with the speed of light, and they're not only copying what another messaging platform or another technology company, what another social network company did. They're actually bringing out new stuff. Now, one thing is to be known for that in China, across Asia. Another thing is to get that global pull like a Google, like a Facebook, like other brands from the Western world would have. Would they be able to pull off that technology? That's the second one in terms of making this happen, for example. And that's because of authenticity, but also come from innovation and being different, so you're not going to do just what the other guys have done. That's where Asia have to think very carefully. This game is currently being played out. Is Asia trying to get better? Or is Asia trying to be different? Here's a very political loaded statement. From a Westerner, I spent 17 years in Singapore, so I'm kind of an Asia, so I kind of think that I'm a little yellow inside with a love of Asia. I love Asia a lot. Asia rose the last 40, 50 years of industrialization of Asia, starting by Japan, coming into Korea, now China, and the rest of it, Singapore many years ago, were always the quest to get better. What do I mean by that? Somebody had defined what a great car were. Someone had defined what a great mobile phone were. Okay, perfect. Let's re-engineering a bit. Some of them called it copy 20, 30 years ago. And once Asian firms, Asians get it right, they are insanely great at executing. Supply chain, manufacturing, flat screens, components, you mentioned, look at the last 40 years of the rise of Asia. The first tier rise of the Asian region came from simply getting better and maybe being best. Now, I don't know, one fine day we can 3D print our own car here in Norway. Then it doesn't matter so much. At least it's not going to come from China. The mobile phone is not going to come from Korea anymore. Who knows? So what's next here? Next is on only to get better, because production can go elsewhere. I told you, eastern coastal regions of China are now too expensive to produce most goods, so they're moving elsewhere into Vietnam, Southeast Asia, India, into Africa. We're going to think that we can also execute, but that we can also learn and we can also create. I'll give you one very good example just to illustrate that. You all heard about Zara, right? Inditex, owned by the Spanish guy, Mr. Ortega, out of La Coruña, northern Spain. If some of you, women and girls, move into Zara, some actually did 10, 12 years ago in Asia. They did it in India a few hours back, and now you're going to do that in downtown Oslo and later in London. You're going to walk in and you're going to ask for pink scarves. Zara doesn't have pink scarves. But the store manager will pick up and say, someone asked for a pink scarf. They will send it back to the store, to the product manager in La Coruña. When she goes to work, I think she did report to work right now, she would see that there are a lot of thousands of requests for pink scarves to Zara. And what she will decide, and she's not going to ask the chairman, she will decide on her own, wait a minute, Scarlett Johansson last Sunday wore a pink scarf at the Oscars. I wonder why women and girls are asking for pink scarves. Let's produce it. Because first of all, customers have told us, thousands, that they want it. 7 working days. You got 5 million pink scarves in all the 6,800 plus Zara stores. 7 working days. And if you come in the day after tomorrow, bad luck, they're all sold out and they won't come back. Scarcity is part of Zara's trick. There will be another product coming on Monday or Tuesday. What is that all about? That's not only about executing, that's actually about learning from customers and then create on top of that, and also being good at executing. Asian firms have not been very, very good at that. Samsung, almost decided to relocate the corporate headquarters of Samsung 8 years ago to New York City, to New Jersey. Fortunately, they didn't, because they are an archetypical Korean firm, and I think they should stay in Korea, because that's what made them great in the first place. But there was always this quest of just doing what the Western firms did. But now that's changing, because Asian firms are going to decide between getting better and getting different, and you're probably going to find your model and your formula between those two. But there's a big quest for getting different for Asian firms. So what are you going to do? First of all, you're going to partner and you're going to co-create with the darlings. Who are the darlings? If I know, I would be a very rich guy by now, and I would be richer tomorrow, because nobody knows who these darlings are going to be, from which country, from which industry. But there are darlings out there that we can learn from, we can get inspired from, and that we can actually work with. But they're also going to be, I call them dragons, and I think we should learn from them. You should monitor them. You should respect them very carefully, very closely, because they're going to be your enemies. They're going to be your biggest challenge of a lifetime in whatever industry. Nation's going to look at it. Prime Minister's going to be defined by it. You will see darlings and you will see dragons moving out of Asia. So what is happening right now, as you can see now, I guess most of you are going to graduate out of the President's Business School. What are the implications after this? Because you're going to see massive changes and disruptions in your lifetime career. There are just massive challenges coming up. We just talked about Asia. So what are the implications for you guys? Implications are that you should respect this. You will be defined very much, I think, by the rise also of Asia. Asia is not going to be the only thing, but it will be a large one. So you're going to make sure you have this resilience. Don't be swayed by it. You need to have a short-term lens. Why? Because you're going to perform towards the stock exchange or the family owner of your family business, which could be your dad or your auntie, I don't know. But you're also going to make sure you have that kind of vertical and horizontal outlook. So yes, we're going to learn from it, we're going to respect it, but I'm also going to put my feet in the ground and do it my way somehow. So you're going to think very carefully about defining your own purpose, not defined by the Korean way or the Chinese way, because who knows, there will be a wave after that eventually. You're going to have resilience, and that's very tough, because once you are hit very hard by something, it's very easy to give up, very easy to get swayed, but maybe you shouldn't. Steve Jobs didn't believe in market research. Everyone came to him and said, Mr. Jobs, we need to run focus groups, we need to do this, we need to ask women and men what they want for Apple. And he said, no way. I know better than anyone in this world what they need in terms of technology. I will give them an iPad, I will give them an iPod back in history, I'll give them an iPhone, and who knows what he would have done tomorrow. He had that kind of resilience. You're going to build your networks with the darlings and dragons for sure. You're going to have that long-term lens, because in technology, in building great companies, yes, we are kind of swayed by all these digital startup companies, and in 6 months' time we can earn $1 billion. Yes, that's going to be part of it. But some industries, some companies actually take time to build up. Also for the sake that building brands and kind of getting a mark on the ground takes time for people to pick that up and understand it. You're going to be agile, you're going to adapt, and then you need to have what I call culture orientation, in terms of understanding markets, understand your organization, understand where you come from, and not just trying to be like someone else. So I think in order to compete, in order to adapt to, in order to learn from, in order to stand up to some of those Asian firms which you have seen already, but you haven't seen all of them as we speak, and there will be more of them, they will be more powerful. What should you do? You're going to be defined by your ability and your willingness to always drive a transition agenda. I think that's going to be one of the biggest changes compared to leadership in the past, compared to tomorrow's leadership. That transformation and transition is just going to be a real-time event. Strategy is going to be real-time. It's going to be on the go. It's going to be 24/7, and we adapt, we learn, and we just keep walking all the time. I hope you will be daring. I hope you will be bold, and I hope you will dare to be different as well. I'll entice you a bit of advertising here to move into what I call my Insight Center. I have hundreds of free articles on my website. Go steal it, copy it, use it for your task, get inspired by it, and also download the chapter from the book and follow all the learnings and all the insights that we keep producing all the time. As Kevin Lane Keller, who is one of the leading brand academics, he's now co-branding himself with Professor Kotler. You heard about Kotler? Professor Kotler? He probably had done the 100th edition of the marketing management book. Kevin Lane Keller is a younger professor. He's now tying up with Kotler because Kotler is an old guy by now. The last line in Kevin Lane Keller's book, Strategic Brand Management, says, "Life is short, build brands." Thank you.